Okay, here we go. Welcome, Rightscasters. I am your host, Pete Freeman, and I am excited to bring you our featured guest today, Andrew Falk. Andrew, thanks for getting on the show.
It's good to be here.
Andrew Falk is a senior fellow at Sagamore Institute, an Indianapolis-based think tank. He's worked at the Office of Assistant Chief Counsel in U.S. Customs and Border Protection and at the Office of Attorney General of Indiana in the Appeals Division. Andrew's work focuses on criminal code reform. Andrew, give a warm welcome to our audience and tell them a little bit more about yourself.
It's good to have everyone here. As Pete said, my name is Andrew Falk. I am an attorney by training. I have worked for a couple of different judges. I've worked in private practice. I've worked in public practice, and am, for the most part, no longer practicing law, but I still very much have a love for the law. And so I'm now involved with public policy work, both on a national and international, as well as state level. And I'm really enjoying it.
Very cool. Before we get into your work around criminal code reform, tell us what rights-based work you're up to right now.
I think the primary aspect of rights-related work that I'm involved with is an interesting blend of rights of those who are accused of committing a crime, the rights of offenders who are convicted of committing a crime in our justice system, the rights of the victims of those offenders, as well as a little more nebulous right, but the right of society as a whole, if you can look at it that way, to be free from crime and the problems that causes. So there's a lot of different rights inherent to the work that I'm doing.
Sounds like it. Let's rewind. I want to ask what inspired you to get involved in criminology and criminal code reform. So take us way back to the first moment or moments where you thought, yeah, this is what I'd like to do for a good chunk of my work life.
If you asked my parents, they would say that I was always very rule-based. I liked it when we had clear rules for family life. I'm not sure we ever got a written set of rules, but that was kind of my dream. From my earliest memory, I have enjoyed studying ancient codes and then thinking about, okay, what's the best system of justice for our society? And the analogy that I like to use, if you've ever been in a parking lot after it has recently snowed, and the snow covers up all the parking lines. It hasn't been cleared off yet. And the cars just park very haphazardly. There's no order. Normally you'd walk out and you can see nice straight rows both directions. But when it snowed, they're just doing the best they can. And it's very haphazard and the lines sneaking around. And this is the same way with the law. When a society does not have a clear sense of what is right and wrong, the laws are, it's chaos. And so I like to have a clear sense of order in that sense. And the criminal field is certainly one area in which that's very important. A second aspect of that is that I feel for both the those who have been victimized by crime as well as those who are committing crime, who have the potential to be valuable members of society, and yet, because of one reason or another, have chosen or been forced into a life of crime. And so there needs to be some form of justice to both turn them around, turn them from their ways, and hopefully bring them back to be productive members of society. Make it right as best they can. I don't really like the phrase paying their debt to society, but something that they owe to society and to their victims, and then returning to a life as productive citizens.
Very cool. Well, I tell you, my sister, she's a freshman in high school, and she and I just had this conversation about Hammurabi's Code because she's a freshman, she's taking, I think, some course called pre-AP Geography and History of the World. Do you have a favorite code, speaking of ancient codes? And in your studies as a kid, did Hammurabi's Code ever come up, and do you particularly like it?
I liked Hammurabi's Code just because the name is awesome. The ancient code with which I am most familiar with would certainly be the Old Testament books of the law. And I enjoyed reading those, but other ancient works as well. I enjoyed studying from time to time.
Very cool. What specific work do you do now regarding criminal code reform? How does one go about reforming criminal code?
For, I would say, at least 6 years, Indiana, the Indiana legislature and various individuals have been very actively pursuing code reform in Indiana. The first major legislation in our criminal code reform was introduced and then enacted in 2013. It was called House Bill 1006. But the work for that began long before that. It began at least 3 or 4 years before that, when study committees began researching what the law is, what the law should be, what the problems with it are, looking at other states, model penal codes, and trying to figure out what should we do to make our criminal code more proportional, more fair, dealing with various inconsistencies in the law, and generally revising it such that it just works better. So study committees met for several years, drafts were put together, presented to various legislative study groups or committees, and finally in 2013 the first bill was introduced, amended, enacted, and then there was a subsequent revision of it in 2014, same bill number 1006. And it actually took effect on July 1st of 2014. Although there are some aspects of it that won't take effect until January 1st of this coming year, 2016. And there's a lot of funding issues that were addressed in the 2015 General Assembly, and we're seeing some of those starting to work out. So it's been a long process, and it's going to be a continuing process. Part of what I'm specifically doing is in the 2014 General Assembly, they enacted legislation that requires a report being produced each year, looking at the effect of this criminal code reform. And so I'm involved with helping to prepare those reports, looking at the effect of this legislation on the criminal justice system.
Very cool. Then why criminal code reform? In other words, why not pursue a different avenue with regard to addressing incarceration issues?
I don't think that anyone would say that it's an either-or proposition, or this is only one of many options. Just about everyone who's involved with criminal code reform sees it as one method, one means to get to the good end of helping our system. But we have to start somewhere, and it's good to start with the law, while other aspects are also being explored. Because if the laws themselves make it such that if the laws themselves are, I don't want to cut that part. The law is a foundation for much of what happens, and so it's good to start with the foundation and build it. But it works out in many different ways in many different places. And so law is a good place to start, but there's also many other aspects of being at the same time.
What advice would you give to a student who, say, is interested in criminology and interested in something like prison reform, which there are a growing number of, by the way, but perhaps don't know where to start? I know, and I'll speak from experience, there are many students at my university, Notre Dame, who are very passionate about prison reform and about issues around prison reform. But outside of tossing their name out to volunteer at the Juvenile Justice Center, for example, or a halfway home for formerly incarcerated men and women, they're not sure how they can make an impact themselves. And of course, those are certainly great ways, but I think students are beginning to look for ways in which they can lend their voice or their time or their energy to saying, hey, I'd like a change to be made, and I'm willing to stand my ground and tell you how I'd like to do it. How would you suggest students do that?
I think the first thing is to educate yourself and recognize that crime is a problem that society has endured since the beginning of time, and understand that every generation deals with its own issues and has its own issues with which to deal. But it's not something that's new, and it's not something that's solved quickly and easily. It's not a problem that we can just make go away over a lifetime. So I think it takes a lot of humility. I've been involved with the criminal justice system for, you know, from law school, from clerking, various internships. Spent 4 years in the Attorney General's office, and now I've been for the better part of a year, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. There's so much out there that I honestly I don't know. I'm learning all the time. There's an awful lot to learn. So much in the last year. There's still so much out there that I barely get to scratch the surface. So approach the issue with a real humility. That you're not going to figure it all out immediately. It's going to take time. But the best place to start is to learn what the situation is, learn what is being done, learn what other states or other countries are doing, and talk to people. The internet's great in terms of finding out a lot of information, but if you can talk to a judge or a prosecutor or a public defender, and someone who's spent time in the system and is now out, spend time talking to them, but understand that even their perspectives are very limited, and they're unique to their situation and their perspective. So get informed, learn all you can, talk to people involved in the field, and then see what opportunities may open to you in terms of making your voice heard to your representative, your state senator, as the criminal code reforms continue and as other reforms continue. Make your voice heard and seek out, as you suggest, lots of opportunities to make a difference. It's a small step, but I'm increasingly seeing that one of the best things to do to help offenders who are incarcerated and to prevent them from returning to that life and ending back up in prison is to have a mentoring relationship. And it seems to me that's one of the most tried and true methods is to get involved with someone, come alongside them, to develop a relationship with them, to help them be an encouragement, accountability partner, to encourage them once they get out. And if we could become a lot better at that, that would go a long way to solving a lot of our issues.
I love it. has working in the world of criminal code reform shifted your perspective at all, from when you started to where you are now? And have you learned anything that might surprise our audience along the way?
The issue of over incarceration is a hot topic and a bandwagon on which many are jumping these days. And I think that in many ways that it is a good one. But I think because one of the things that surprised, to answer your question, one of the things that most surprised me was to learn that you often hear that prison is just a school for criminals. And to an extent it is. But even aside from the bad influences that criminals have upon each other, there's also the aspect of which the more time someone spends in prison, the more likely they are to commit further crimes, which is the reverse of what we like it to be. Prison certainly has its place. We need prison for those who have committed some of the worst crimes and are a threat to others. And I think it definitely has its place for that. But in many cases, I think it'd be much better to send 5 people to prison for 3 years rather than one person to that same cell for 15 years. And you'll reap more benefits. And that cell space would be much better used in that way. And it's interesting that some of the studies I've seen sending people to prison for a shorter period of time, as opposed to longer periods of time, is actually helpful in reducing the overall, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but studies suggest that that's the case.
Very interesting. Yeah, I had no clue. And you may have just answered this question, but could you share with us an aha moment that you experienced during your work with criminal code reform? And maybe it doesn't even pertain to criminal code reform. Maybe it was a day on the job and something happened, or you read something, or something came up, and it was just influential in shaping how you looked at an aspect of your work.
The last instance I just spoke, the fact that longer sentences are actually counterproductive was one of those aha moments. The mentoring type of relationship that I spoke about earlier, seeing how well that works, and how that's one of the best means to reducing the carousel, the revolving wheel. We call it recidivism, how quickly a person returns to incarceration after they're released. To see that mentoring is one of the best ways of stopping that cycle. That was an aha moment. One of the most fun little tidbits I've had is just like, hey, this is fascinating. I was speaking with a prison warden from the South who said to me, one of the most effective ways of managing his troublemaker inmates was to get on the phone with their mothers and have their mothers talk to their sons. And that means one of the best ways of controlling troublemakers. I was just kind of like, huh. I really enjoyed that. I was hearing how even the sons are grown, hearing how the mother's influence on them and the effect that it could have on their behavior in prison. Those players.
What one factor almost held you back from exploring or beginning work in criminal code reform? So maybe it was in high school, or maybe it was in college or grad school, or as you're beginning to look for employment. Was there ever a moment, and no is a fine answer, where you thought, okay, this is great, I'm really interested, but...
Probably the biggest thing that has held me back is just interest in other areas of the law. I thoroughly enjoyed not only criminal code, but also environmental issues and other areas of the law as well. And so if there's anything that's holding back from criminal code, criminal work generally, it's other interests.
broad question. How can not just the Indianapolis area where you work, but the nation as a whole promote the basic human rights of families and young men and women? So kind of segueing away from criminal code now, and just want to pick your brain. This is a broad question, so feel free to narrow it in and shape it however you want. But is there a step or series of steps that you see from your unique vantage point of thinking, man, if everybody just did this, or, oh, if this group maybe did this differently, it would have such a big impact for such a small amount of effort?
To return to a theme I've spoken about twice, it's the role of mentoring. I think to have, it's true for those being released from prison and adjusting back to life outside. It's also true for every area of life, that as a society, too often we expect people to live and grow without good mentors. And I think that especially with the children, especially coming from broken homes or single parent homes, they may be lacking a mother or a father figure, and so be in greater need of someone to help them gain their way. I think the other thing that I would like to see much more of is the involvement of faith-based organizations. And I've been reading a book by a researcher named Brian Johnson. His book is called More God, Less Crime. And everywhere he goes, not everywhere he goes, but many places in which he's gone, people were skeptical of his work. And yet, almost every study that he has participated in or seen others participate in shows that faith-based organizations have a profound impact above and beyond what others would expect. And so I'd love to see more faith-based organizations involved with not only criminal justice, but also other social. We've had that some in the past and we've gotten away from it. I think it's a valuable solution to many of our issues.
Excellent. Before we wind down the episode and say goodbye, is there any way that listeners can reach out to you, or if not, then a resource you would suggest, or some sort of extension of the topic that we have talked about today?
Sure, you can check out our the Sagamore Institute has a webpage that's currently under development, but hopefully that will be up very soon. So sagamoreinstitute.org. You can email me at andrew@sagamoreinstitute.org. To see your emails. Try to respond as many. Those would be the best ways to reach me and to see the work that we're doing.
Perfect. Our guest today has been Andrew Falk, Senior Fellow at Sagamore Institute. Andrew, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you, Pete.